The Honourable David Parker.
Mr Chairman, I want to carry on in respect of one of the aspects of Part 1 relating to child support payments, and it is the issue that my colleague Stuart Nash has just been talking about, which is the influence of penalties on the total liability that is owed to the Crown, and which is made up of the individual liabilities of thousands of New Zealanders who've fallen behind in their child support payments. Now, I don't think anyone on either side of this House thinks it appropriate that parents be able to avoid their primary responsibility for paying for the care of their children by not making payments when they should, and that they, as the parent of the child, have the first and foremost responsibility to pay for the care of that child, even when that child is not in their custody, and that therefore they should meet their obligations of child support. But as Stuart Nash has said, the total amount of arrears in respect of child support is now about $3 billion, an enormous amount of money, and we know that for some people, whether it's child support payments or when they get behind in their student debt payments, student loan repayments, that the amount of penalties starts to compound at a rate which is just intolerable for them. They give up, and not only does the amount that is shown as a liability to the Crown actually becomes a fiction because it can never be repaid, it becomes an impediment to them paying anything because the arrears seem to be so intolerably large. Now, Mr Chairman, in that regard, I want to know why the interest rate that is charged on these debts remains so high in this low interest rate environment. And I think it's a bit of a one-way street when it comes to the Department of Inland Revenue as to when they adjust the rates. Interest rates have dropped to the lowest that they've been around the world for, well, really, in everyone's lifetime and the lifetime of people before them. Interest rates are historically low around the world. In fact, I think we heard the Governor of the Reserve Bank saying that English interest rates are the lowest that they've ever been since in 400 years. And New Zealand interest rates are no different. They're very low by historical standards. They're still higher than they are in some other countries, which sort of jacks up the New Zealand exchange rate to the detriment of the economy. But they're still lower than they have been historically, and I want to hear from the Minister, one, what the current rate of interest is, and two, how it is justified. Because, Mr Speaker, my understanding is that this $3 billion that's owed in arrears, if interest on that is at 5%, well, that's another $150 million that those liable parents collectively own by the end of the year. If it's at 10%, that's $300 million. If it's 3%, well, it's only, it's a lesser amount. Mr Speaker, Mr Chairman, I think that the government kids itself when it adds these amounts to the penalties and doesn't properly provide for the fact that a lot of these amounts are not ever going to be paid because the penalties have become so high. I know that some provision is made by the government in the books as to, or in fact I'd like to hear from the Minister as to what amount, if anything, is provided for in the government books to show that these amounts are not going to be repaid, and why it is that in this Remedial Matters Bill that has a whole section on amendments to child support matters, why we don't fix this issue of interest rates and why we continue to charge penalties at such a high rate in this low interest environment.
Mr Chair. I call David Clark.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I want to